Once upon a time, there was a little girl named Francesca. And Francesca, she didn't play sports. She wasn't into video games. Her passion was plants. And she was very lucky because her parents had a beautiful garden. Both her mom and her dad were super into planting flowers. They would plant vegetables. They had a vegetable garden. Everything they put in their salad came from their garden. It was very important to them. And they were lucky because Francesca just inherited that passion for plants. She loved animals too, but plants were really her passion. So every morning she would go out and she would water different plants. I mean, she wouldn't water the plants every morning because, as you know, you'll drown the plants. They can't have too much water. They need water. But they lived in a dry area, so they needed a good bit of water. And she had this special watering can that she loved. And she had personalized it. She had gotten out some acrylic paints, and she had painted a beautiful, mural around it. It was a mural of it was a nature scene, and it had birds and flowers and tomatoes and zucchini and all the things that they would grow. And so one morning, she went out to water the tomatoes. And when she got out to the garden, she saw the strangest thing.
She went looking, and her watering can was not there. Now, Francesca cares a lot about this watering can. It's personalized. She has all of the beautiful images on the side of it, including a little butterfly. The butterfly was her favorite thing to draw on the watering can. She learned how to draw it in art class in school, and so she just started drawing butterflies on everything, which, of course, also meant the watering can. Francesca had been taught by her parents to make sure that everything has its place. She was a very tidy kid. And she left that watering can in the same spot she always did, on a little stool next to the garden. But the watering can wasn't there, and that had never happened before. So she began to look around the garden. Was the watering can behind possibly all of the pumpkins that were growing for the fall? No, it wasn't there. Maybe someone borrowed it. Maybe her mom borrowed it to help water all of the flowers on the other side of the yard. So she ran across the yard as fast as she could, and then stopped and tiptoed a little bit, because she didn't want to run too fast and kick up too much dirt and leave any holes in the grass. And she walked over to the flowers, and she looked around, and there were little flowers and poppies and tulips and really beautiful ones, and then there were really, really tall sunflowers. They were growing this time in season, which was a little strange because usually they don't grow at the same time as the pumpkins. So that was a little weird too. And she's looking around, and she still can't find the watering can. So she thought, I'm going to sit, I'm going to think, where was the last place I put it? And she closed her eyes, and she took a deep breath in through her nose and out through her mouth, and she snapped her eyes open. I know that I left it on that stool. I know that's where the watering can was. So there must be something strange happening. So she walked back over to the stool, and she stood and she looked at the rest of the yard and the rest of the garden to see maybe it was somewhere else. And she looks, and she looks, and she sees nothing. And so she thinks to herself, okay, maybe I can hear it. Maybe there'll be a little bit of water left inside, and maybe it'll slosh around when the wind blows, or maybe it's somewhere uneven and I may be able to hear it. And she closes her eyes and she focuses on her hearing. And she's listening, and she's listening, and she hears something that she's never heard before, a whistle sound. Almost as if somebody was trying to get her attention. And so she starts to follow the sound. And she's walking, and there's a little swing set in the backyard as well. And she's hearing the whistling, and it's getting louder and louder and louder. And then she finds her watering can. And the whistling, would you believe it? It's coming from inside the watering can. So she grabs the watering can, and there's an opening at the top, and she looks inside. And inside the watering can, she sees what looks like a little tiny fairy. No, it's not a fairy. It's a talking butterfly inside the watering can. And that wasn't a whistle sound at all. It was singing. It was just such small singing that it sounded like whistling. And Francesca looks inside and sees this butterfly singing a song and says, "What are you doing in my watering can?" And the butterfly looks back up and says, "Well, I'm taking a swim. What are you doing outside of the watering can?" And Francesca says, "Well, this is my special watering can. I have to go water all of the plants. I can't water the plants if you're in here." And the butterfly looks up and says, "Well, this is where I go to swim. You can't mush me around inside here. I have to swim." And Francesca looks down and goes, "But butterfly, isn't it a bad thing if your wings get wet? I thought that butterflies had to stay out of the water." And the butterfly says, "Well, I'm no ordinary butterfly."
I mean, you heard me singing. Obviously, I'm not an ordinary butterfly. And Francesca said, "Yeah, I did recognize that song. I think that's my mom's favorite song." And she said, "Well, I love Whitney Houston too." This butterfly was a huge Whitney Houston fan, and that song was "I Want to Dance with Somebody." And it's a real upbeat number. If you don't know it, kids, you should check it out. It'll put a smile on your face. So anyway, Francesca got a little distracted with the Whitney Houston talk and realized that she needed to resolve this issue because she needed to use the watering can to water, and the singing butterfly, who we'll call Whitney the butterfly, needed it to swim. So Francesca was a little bit frustrated, but she thought it was pretty cool that there was a butterfly in her watering can that could swim, could get her wings wet, and could hit all of those high notes that Whitney could hit. She thought that was pretty cool. So she thought, you know what? I'm going to come up with a plan. So she leaned over the watering can and she yelled down to Whitney. She said, "Hang on, Whitney, I've got an idea." So she ran into her shed and she looked around. There were a bunch of gardening tools and other tools, pitchforks and pails, and she finally found a watering can. And it wasn't as nice as the one that she had because obviously it hadn't been customized. But she thought, you know what? I think Whitney will be happy swimming in this watering can. I think I'm going to offer this up as an alternative because I can't be sharing this with a butterfly. So she left the shed, she walked over to Whitney, and she held up the new watering can. And Whitney at this point was singing "I Will Always Love You," which was written by Dolly Parton, but made famous by Whitney Houston. And she was killing it. She was, and the acoustics, Francesca realized in the watering can really just added such depth to her tone. Anyway, so Francesca brought the watering can over. She showed it to Whitney. She said, "Look, Whitney, I've got a perfect watering can for you. It's the same shape. It's got all the acoustics that you need. I can fill it with just as much water. And that way we both have a watering pail." Whitney the butterfly flew out of the watering can and she hovered above the old kind of rusty one and kind of inspected it. She buzzed around it a little bit and then she landed on the edge. She peeked in and she drew her head way back. She said, "Oh, this thing smells terrible. There's no way I can sing my Whitney Houston songs in this disgusting watering can. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to stay in the beautiful one that you've painted." So Francesca was increasingly getting frustrated because she had to water these plants before she had to get to school. And this was just taking up way too much time arguing with a singing butterfly. And as much as she thought the singing butterfly was cool and she was impressed by it, you can understand she was frustrated. She had something to do.
So Francesca pulled up the alternate watering can to see if Whitney was really onto something with it smelling or if she was just being picky. And Francesca put her nose in the watering can and took a big sniff and went, "Okay, nope, Whitney has a point. This is terrible. It smells awful in here." And she looks inside this watering can and she notices that this thing has not been cleaned probably since before Francesca was even born. So she decides, you know what? I'm going to do something quick. She grabs the watering can and she runs over to the hose and she fills the watering can up with water. And she gets it all the way to the top and then she starts to pour it out. She She decides to pour it out over on the side of the garden that needs a little bit more help. Some of the flowers that don't get nearly as much sunlight, and they can use a little bit more love. So this way, if the water that comes out of the can is a little gross, it's okay. These flowers don't mind. They're used to being left alone. So she gets some of the water out of this watering can, and there's just dirt, and there's a little bit of rusted pieces that comes out, and she goes, Whitney was right. This watering can, this is not good for anyone. But she cleans it out and she decides, you know what? This project is a little bit too big for me. This is a project that I'm gonna need some help with. Probably this weekend when my parents are off work, they can help me out because I shouldn't be messing around with a rusted watering can. That's a good way to get tetanus. And nobody wants tetanus because that means you have to go to the doctor and get a shot. And I don't want to get a shot. So she puts the watering can down and she looks around her yard a little bit more. And she notices that there is a bird bath in the backyard. And she thinks to herself, well, that's just a really big pool. And she grabs her good watering can, the beautiful one where Whitney's inside, and she's still singing. This time she's on the greatest love of all. She is just wailing those high notes. It is echoing beautifully. And she pulls up the watering can and she goes, look, Butterfly, I've got a deal. How about I bring you to the bird bath? And this way you can continue singing, you can continue swimming, but the whole world will get to hear you sing songs because you won't be inside the watering can. And then I can use the watering can and I can water all of the vegetables and all of the flowers, and we both have exactly what we want. And Whitney thinks for a second, you know, I do like this watering can. I like having the privacy, but I like the idea of the whole world getting to hear me sing a whole lot more. So Francesca brings the watering can over to the bird bath and she gently pours it out, and all of the water fills up the bird bath, and Whitney the butterfly sits in there and she starts singing her song, and it is so beautiful. And all of the birds come flying over to the bird bath and they want to sit on the edge and they want to spend time and they want to sing with Whitney the butterfly as well. The end. Once upon a time, there was a little boy named Joseph, and Joseph didn't like to laugh. Laughing was something that he was so afraid to do, because when Joseph laughed, he would let out a little snort, kind of like a pig. So no matter what anybody said, no matter how funny it was, Joseph would hold his face very stern. It would look as if nothing was funny. You could have the funniest cartoon, the funniest joke, the funniest noise in the whole world, and Joseph would bite down on his lower lip and he would hold his face stern because he didn't want to laugh. Because when Joseph was in kindergarten, a girl in class was running outside and slipped and fell in the mud. And everybody laughed at her, and Joseph was laughing. But when he started laughing, his laugh went, and then suddenly, everyone in class turned around, and it didn't matter that this little girl was covered in mud. No one cared about that anymore, because now we had Joseph the pig boy, and nobody wanted to be his friend anymore. So from that day on, Joseph decided, I'm not laughing at anything. One day, Joseph arrives at school, and he sits in the back seat of the class like he normally does. And everyone in class kind of ignored Joseph at this point. They were, let's say, a little scared of him. He's the kid that never laughs. There's gotta be something weird. Little did they know that Joseph didn't laugh because they made fun of him. Everybody seems to forget the things that they make fun of people for in kindergarten, especially when you're in third grade. That's like a whole lifetime ago. So Joseph sat there in the back of the class, and the teacher comes in and says, "Great news, everyone. We're going on a field trip today." And Joseph just sat there, stern-faced, as all of his classmates cheered. They were so excited. Joseph wasn't excited. He didn't let anyone know when he was excited. And the teacher said, "Today, we are going to the circus." And suddenly, as if time had stopped, Joseph took a deep breath and he gulped. "The circus," he thought. "There's going to be acrobats, and that'll be cool. There's going to be lions, and that'll be a little scary. But oh no, there's going to be clowns at the circus." And Joseph wasn't afraid of clowns because he thought they were scary. Joseph was afraid of clowns because he thought they were funny. And if he thought they were funny, he was going to laugh. And if he was going to laugh, then he was going to snort. And if his class heard him snort, then they were all going to make fun of him. And then they're all going to think he was weird again. Oh no, this is not good for Joseph. So he decided, I got to get out of this somehow. So the first thing he did is he decided, I'm going to fake sick. He raises his hand and he calls on his teacher and he goes, Miss Smith, I can't go to the circus today. I'm sick." And she looks at him. She goes, "Joseph, you're not sick. You're just in a bad mood. You're going to the circus today." And he sits there and goes, "Okay, well that didn't work. So what else can I do? I know, I'll get in trouble. If I get in trouble, then they're certainly not going to let me go on this field trip." So he sits there and he goes, "I'm going to knock my desk over." So in the middle of the lesson, he just grabs his desk and he tilts it over and he spills out all of his papers and all of his books, and it makes a loud sound and it scares the whole room. And he looks at his teacher and goes, "Well, Miss Smith, I sure made a big commotion in here. I guess I can't go to the circus today." She goes, "Joseph, you're going to the circus. Now please, put your desk back together because we have to go." Joseph pouted. He thought to himself, "Oh, I guess I'm gonna have to go." He lines up with the rest of his class and they're all excited. They're jumping up and down. They're all talking about how much popcorn they're gonna eat. They're all thinking about what's the most exciting thing that they're going to see. And they all go on the bus. And they go on the bus and Joseph, he sits by himself and he pouts and he stews and he thinks, what if when I get there, I just close my eyes the whole time? I don't even see what's happening. I don't even see what's funny. That way, I definitely won't laugh. The school bus arrives at the circus and they all march out of the bus and they're walking around the gravel and all of their shoes are crunching all of the rocks as they head towards the big top. And they go in the big top and there's an MC in the center of the ring and he's got a big top hat and he's welcoming everybody in and he's got a big voice and he's very exciting and everyone in the room is so excited to see him except for Joseph. And the ringmaster notices this and he looks at Joseph and he goes, "What's wrong, kid? Aren't you having fun?" And he goes, "I don't have fun." And they go, "Oh, I see. We have a kid here who doesn't have fun." And so the ringmaster thinks to himself, that's my mission today. We're gonna make sure that this kid has fun. So while all of the kids take their seat and they get excited, the ringmaster runs backstage behind the curtain where all of the circus folk are, and he tells the clown specifically, "There's a boy. You can't miss him. He's got a very grumpy face. Our goal today should be to make that kid smile. I think we can do it." So the circus begins. The acrobats come out and they flip and they're tossing and they're doing the coolest stunts you've ever seen. Everyone in Joseph's class is cheering. And then you have the lion tamer come out and everyone is a little nervous because this is dangerous stuff. But the lion tamer knows exactly what he's doing and the lion is roaring but listening and everybody feels safe. But then the clown comes out and Joseph, he feels his heart racing. Oh no. The clown, he's gonna make me laugh. Everyone is gonna hear me snort, and I'm not gonna have any friends anymore. And so he sits and he waits, and the clown is doing tricks, he's doing magic, he's telling jokes. Everyone is laughing, and Joseph is biting harder and harder into his lip. I'm not gonna laugh, I'm not gonna laugh. And then suddenly, the clown comes running towards Joseph, running as fast as he possibly can. And right before he gets to Joseph, boom! He gets a pie in the face. and Joseph can't help it. It's the funniest thing he's seen in a long, long time. And he starts laughing and laughing and laughing, and wouldn't you know it, he's laughing, loud snort. And the kids all start laughing at him. And he's so upset, and he wants to be angry, and he wants to just disappear because this is the most embarrassed he has been since kindergarten. But then the clown starts laughing with him. And the clown also starts to snort laugh. And Joseph looks at him and he goes, "You snort laugh too?" And the clown says, "Of course I snort laugh. Anybody who's having a good time has to snort laugh." So Joseph and the clown are laughing and snorting and laughing and snorting, and the rest of the kids, they want to get in on the fun too. So now suddenly the entire class is laughing and snorting and laughing and snorting and having the time of their lives. And one of the kids looks at Joseph and goes, "Joseph, you're a really funny kid. How come you've never let us know how funny you are?" And Joseph says, "Well, because I snort laughed in kindergarten and everybody made fun of me." And they went, "We weren't making fun of you, Joseph. We were laughing because we thought you were so funny." And Joseph thought to himself, well, I guess I've spent the last 3 years being scared of something that I didn't have to be afraid of. And so they enjoyed the rest of the circus, and they got back on the bus to go back to class, and Joseph sat next to a new friend, and he thought to himself, I guess sometimes the best way to handle being scared is to just laugh it off. The end.
Once upon a time, there was a very old man who lived in a very old village, and his name was Clarence. And Clarence was a very adventurous old man. He lived alone, but he had lots of friends in the village, and he had lots of friends in neighboring villages, and he would often go on long walks to visit these friends in these villages. Well, one day, he woke up, he brewed himself a strong pot of English breakfast tea, squeezed a lemon in, as was his tradition. He wasn't a milk and sugar guy. He had issues with dairy, as some people do. And so he would just squeeze a little lemon in that tea, and he would sit on his porch of his modest house in his old modest village, and he would sip on his tea and just look out at the beautiful scenery around him. And the village was pretty spread out, and it had been built into the forest. So if you can imagine Clarence on his porch in his morning robe, he had an evening robe, he had a morning robe, and he only wore his evening robe in the evening, and he only wore his morning robe in the morning, and he loved it. It's like a French terry kind of fabric. It was very soft, and he would just shrug his shoulders, he'd sip on his hot tea, the steam would rise off of his cup of tea, and he would look out into the forest, through the village. Occasionally he'd see a deer pass by, maybe a neighbor's dog who would come up and pet him. He always kept, in one of his robe pockets, he always kept a few bits of bacon for the neighborhood dogs who would come by and visit. He didn't have a dog of his own, but he loved dogs. You know, he was like everyone's favorite uncle. No kids of his own, no dogs of his own, but he loved everyone else's kids, everyone else's dogs. One morning, this dog named Barney came up, as Barney was known to do. Barney was his most frequent visitor. Barney was a beautiful black lab, and Barney went straight for the pocket of Clarence's robe because Barney knew where the bacon was, and Clarence reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of bacon, and he gave it to Barney, and Barney just devoured it right there, looked up at Clarence with a look of gratitude, and then Barney's attention turned to Clarence's bare feet. And Clarence followed Barney's attention, and he looked at his own bare feet for the first time this morning. He hadn't checked his feet. Who does? They're just feet. They're always on you. And he noticed what Barney noticed. One of his toenails was twice as long as the rest, and it was not the same color as all of his other toenails. It had been painted in the color of a rainbow.
Now, Clarence was not a man to be overly excited by anything. He had seen great things in his time. He had experienced plenty of adventures in his walks from village to village, but this sight of his own toenail twice as long and maybe growing longer as he looked at it, and the color of the rainbow sent a shudder through his spine. Even Barney the dog seemed to whine and mutter a little bit, and Clarence knew there had to be something he could do. Now, his town was very nice. It was filled with all kinds of good people, but none of them he would call wise. No, wise people lived through the forest. Probably the next town over is a wiser community, he would say. In fact, he knew one man who was one town over, maybe 5 miles through the darkest part of the forest, who was an expert in all things feet and fungal. And he thought, aha, I'll go see Philip, the feet and fungal maestro. So he stepped off his porch without even changing out of his morning robe and found his way into the forest, moving at a brisk pace. I'll be there and back by evening, able to change into my morning robe, my evening robe, and have a nice glass of chamomile tea, which is what he had in the evening because the caffeine from English breakfast will keep you up all night long. He was only 20 yards into the forest when he realized that Barney was trotting along with him. Good to have you along on the adventure, Barney, he said, and the two of them struck their way into the forest. Now, as he walked, it seemed that the air grew a little cooler. Maybe it was just because he was out of the sun, but no, there was something chilling in the way that the shadows stretched across the path in front of him. And he realized that he wasn't wearing any shoes. Well, of course, he had left in kind of a hurry, and how could he fit a shoe over that toenail? Oh my gosh, it was 4 times as long now. Almost as long as his foot, scraping ahead of him. Well, no, a shoe would be quite impossible. And he was a little bit unnerved and found himself very grateful to have Barney next to him. He tried to whistle, but the sound fell silent and muted in the midst of the mossy wood. He tried to hum a little bit, but even that sounded too trying, too eager, maybe too desperate. So instead, he let himself just fall silent and listen to the sounds around him. Now, Clarence was known to love the sounds of a forest. He loved the sound of a squirrel chewing on bark, or the weird sounds of a possum getting into a fight with a pine cone. All these sounds were music to his ears. Even birds twittering to him was something wonderful. But today, he heard nothing. There were no squirrels fighting with bark, or possums arguing with pine cones, or birds twittering to one another. No, everything in the woods felt cold and quiet and shadowy. Now, he was not a man to be scared, as I've mentioned before, but he was a man to be aware of his circumstances. He had a toenail that was now 8 feet long, covered with all the colors of the rainbow, and as he noticed closer to his toe, there were new colors, different from the rainbow, as if brand new colors that he had never seen were being born on his very toe. And he was only halfway toward the next village to see Philip, the master of fungal foots and other things with F. What was he going to do? In this strange circumstances, what was going to happen to his foot? Why was the forest so quiet? And just when he thought, no, I can't go a step further. I have to return to my home, to my tea, to my front porch, to the comforts of the house that I know, a figure stepped out of the woods. This figure was tall. This figure had skin that didn't look like flesh, but instead looked like the very bark of the trees surrounded him. He seemed to have a beard, but the beard was not hair, but instead the green moss that grew on the trees and the rocks of the forest. He had eyes, but the eyes were not the pupils that you see in a human being. Instead, they were polished stones, and they looked down at Clarence and stared deep into him and said, "Sir, I would like to bargain with you." Now, Clarence knew that if you met a figure in the woods, a figure that he had never seen before, that this was someone you had to show respect to. There's no running away. Clearly, this fella who had legs that looked like tree trunks would easily overtake him. There was no ignoring him. That would be really, really rude, and you don't want to ignore Spirit of the Woods. He just had to converse with him. "Why, sir, I'm in my bathrobe. I have nothing to bargain with." "But you do. You have something I desire." Now Clarence got a little worried. What could this mean? His robe? No. His dog? Well, not his dog, but the dog that had followed him. No. The bacon left in his pocket? No. Instead, the tall, tree-like man said, "I want your toenail."
Well, Clarence was taken aback by this. I mean, after he realized that this wooded warrior spirit bearded entity in the forest was probably not interested in a terry cloth bathrobe and probably didn't want the bacon bits that were left over in his robe pocket and probably didn't want to join him for evening tea. He suspected it could be the now 10-foot multicolored Toenail. And he thought, well, I mean, I need to get something in return for this because this thing seems special. I mean, this has never happened to me. I don't know anyone in any of the neighboring villages, all my friends. No one I know. I've never even heard of this happening. It's not even in any of our mythology. This is obviously something very special. I'm in a bit of a predicament because I would like to get up and run away, but I have a 10-foot piece of toenail jutting out from my foot and I can't run. I'm sort of stuck here. But I don't want to give this up for free because this is obviously very special. It is a gift from the forest gods, he thought. He was a deeply spiritual man and he spent a lot of time in the forest, and he would often talk to the animals, and he had a deep, deep respect for the ways of the natural world. And he wondered what this forest entity would give in return, so he asked. And this forest entity said,
Now Clarence looked into the eyes of this tree man, and the tree man looked back at him, and both of them knew that they were at a crossroads. What could it be? One barky tree nail for one massively now 27-foot-long, multicolored, humming toenail. That's right, the toenail had started to emit a melody in itself, much better than the humming that Clarence had tried, much more deep and resonant than even the tree man before him. They looked at each other and they said, with unspoken antagonism, "This deal just won't do." They started circling about one another, looking to each other's eyes, knowing that a toenail for a toenail was such intimacy, such weird and wild communication of friendship, that maybe they needed to trust each other more. At one point, Clarence thought, I can run for it, I can try and get away. But no, he knew he couldn't. At one point he thought, I could use the toenail as a weapon. In fact, he even looked down at it, now 37 feet long, and thought I could wield it like a massive sword. But no, it seemed wrong to take anything of such beauty, of such color, of such humming elegance, and use it for violence. Then he thought, maybe I can trick the tree man. Maybe I can pretend to give him the toenail, accept his wooded toenail, and then I will be the victor. So he says to the tree man, I accept your bargain. The tree man reached down to his long, barky feet that looked themselves to be as old as redwoods and as wrinkly as the crust of the earth, and he peeled off a large piece of bark. And the tree man said, "Take my toenail and my blessings, Clarence." Clarence thought, now's my chance. Now's my opportunity. Now I can fool the tree man and be powerful of him in all the forest. Then he heard a voice coming out of the humming. Clarence! Clarence, no! And he looked down and he saw the Toenail was talking to him. The Toenail had curling up into a figure, and he now saw that at the very end, the edges had sprayed out into hands, and the hands were as colorful as a toenail overall, and the mouth was a beautiful figure, the face like that of an angel, but with slight toenail energy to it. And the Toenail angel said to him, "I am not for bargain. I am not to be given or taken. I am the one who will choose whose toe I allot myself to. Now, Clarence, I have taken you into the forest, and because I am here, I can now take the tree man into the village." And just like that, she disappeared into smoke and dust, traveled through the air, and landed on the tree's toe. And right where the tree's toenail had been, sprouted 4 mushrooms, all of them iridescent with the colors of the rainbow. And Clarence looked down at his own foot and saw his own toe was back to normal size, back to a way that could really respectably fit in any shoe that he might choose to wear, but had a barkish tint to it. And now the tree man realized he had a bit of the village in him. And Clarence realized, well, he had a bit of the forest in him. And the two realized that without fighting, without bargaining, they had become friends. And the two walked on to the next village to meet up with Philip, not for a cure, not for some wisdom, but just for a cup of tea and a chat on the front porch. The end. There once was a little girl, and this little girl found life horribly uninteresting. She would even say boring. She lived in the middle of a city in a small house with her mother and father. Every day she would go to school and learn numbers, dates, history, science projects, but all of them left her flat. None of them seemed, vibrant. In fact, I don't think she even knew the word vibrant. She knew words like beige, adequate, pop quiz. Then one day her parents said, "For the weekend, we're going into the mountains for a vacation at an Airbnb." And she sighed. "Great, I'll be bored in the mountains instead of bored at home." And she brought along her phone, and she brought along her iPad, and she brought along her music, and sat in the back seat, and the family drove into the mountains. And sure enough, her parents were arguing about directions, and squabbling about politics, and talking about the news, just like they always did, and she found it all so boring. Now, while she was still in the city, she would check in on her friends and see if there were any new videos there people were talking about, or songs, or dances. All of it very much like the last song she had heard, or the same dance that she had seen. All of it the same gossip, sort of spiraling around. All of it very, very boring. For a while, she counted the buildings as she passed, all of them gray, all of them with windows, some 7 stories, some 8, some 4, all of them rather boring numbers. And finally, she got to the bridge where the city ended and the countryside began, and she noticed there were no buildings as she left the city, and she found that, slightly more interesting. In fact, as she got a little further on, she found that the iPad and phone started losing range, and now she thought, well, I'm really gonna be bored. I can't even look at TikTok anymore. And then the woods got a little thicker, and the road started steeping upwards, and she leaned back in her chair because moving up at such a steep rate. And she found that she was looking at the tips of trees as the car approached them. And the tips of trees sort of seemed to spike the sky, seemed to catch the clouds, seemed to kind of play with the sunlight. And she thought, that's something other than boring, I suppose. And she drifted off just enough, sort of dreaming about treetops and clouds and sunlight. And when she woke up, it was sunset. And the family was pulling up in front of a wooden cabin surrounded by nothing but other trees. And her mother and father were moving in the groceries and carrying in the bags. And even they were a little quieter, not arguing about who was to make dinner or squabbling about the latest political results. They seemed quiet as well. And the little girl looked around and wondered, well, where are the other people? Where are the buildings? What is this Airbnb? And her parents said, we We found it on a particular site. We don't even know exactly how it came to us, but it's a very good bargain. We think we should be very, very happy. And the night was being made, and the mother was making a stew, and the father was getting the fire running, and the little girl said, "Oh, I'm going to explore upstairs." And she went up the stairs of the house. It was creaky. Every step made a noise. Now, at home in the city, the steps had been so clean and so quiet that she could creep around without making a noise. But here, it's like the house was talking back to her. Every step she made. She was about to step to the very top stair when her mother called, "Celia!" and she ran back down for dinner. Celia was curious. She couldn't wait to go back upstairs and find out what was making all the noise. Why was the house so alive with creaks? So when her parents finished the dinner, they set to work on a game of Monopoly by the fire and asked if she wanted to join. And she said, "Oh, I'm a little tired of this. Gosh, it's not that late, but I think I'm just going to go to bed." And that's what she did. But Celia wasn't tired at all. She wanted to explore the rest of the upstairs of this house. So she went back up the steps. Celia. She stopped. Did she hear the creaking of the house saying her name? No, surely not. It's just an old house. Celia. But now she was near the top. And now she looked back down, and she could see the flames or the warmth color coming from the living room where her parents were playing a game of Monopoly. And it was warm and bright and orange below, and above her was dark. No light of the day left, not even moonlight. Which way would she go? Now, of course, boring Celia would have gone back down to a game of Monopoly, knowing that, like always, her dad would think he was winning, but her mom would eventually win and have all the different money stored up in her corner. But Celia didn't want to be boring. And it only occurred to her now, for the very first time, that maybe the world wasn't so boring. Maybe she was boring. And she didn't want that, so she stepped up. And now she was on the top floor of this house. And she could feel and see different hallways, but there was such darkness that she couldn't quite find out which direction to go. She walked down one hallway, feeling her way along the wall, until there was a turn down another. She went down there, and then there was another turn and went down there. And finally, seemingly much further than she ever imagined this house to be, she found a door. And when she tried to open it, she opened it just an inch. And then another inch. The door seemed to creak her very name. Would she walk in? Would she enter into a darkness that somehow was even darker than the darkness she was already in? Well, boring Celia never would. Celia didn't want to be boring. So she stepped into the darkness. She went further and further in. When she touched the walls, they were no longer the worn wood of the house that she had been in before. Now they were cold stone, almost like a castle walls she imagined, and some of them seemed cold to the point of dampness. She walked further on, step after step after step, for what seemed like an hour, deeper and deeper into a darkness, and when she looked back, she couldn't even see the shadow of the door in which she had entered. At some point, she called out, "Hello?" And all she heard was the echo of the voice. "It's me! It's me! It's me! It's me! Celia! Celia! Celia!" She thought, maybe I've gone too far. Maybe it is time to be a little bit boring. That would be okay. And she turned back around, but when she did, she found that the door that had been so far away was now immediately behind her. And it was closed. She reached for the handle and tried to push. She tried to pull. She tried everything, but it wouldn't budge. She slammed on it. "Mom! Dad!" She could feel all her screams being absorbed by the stones around her, soaked up by the wood of the door. Celia. Now this wasn't a creak. This wasn't an echo. This was a voice, and it was coming from somewhere far, far, far behind her. Now she couldn't go back, but she thought maybe there's another hallway. Maybe there's a window. Maybe she could find a telephone or something, some way out. So she knew that her one way to escape whatever situation she was in was to walk deeper into the darkness. And she stepped in further and further. But there were no hallways. There were no turnings. There was just step after step after step, to finally, the ahead of her, she saw the slightest flicker of red flame. She thought, oh my God, I've made it back to my parents. I've made it back to the living room. They're probably playing Monopoly now. Maybe I can still join in the game. And she started running. Even in the darkness, her feet slapping against the cold stone floors. Mom, Dad, she called out until she got to the flame. But it was not the living room she remembered. There was the living room. There was the fireplace. There was the game of Monopoly. But all the pieces were covered with dust and cobwebs, as if they'd been there for 100 years. The furniture itself was moldy and falling apart, and crunched over the Monopoly game as if in mid-game, as if still counting the money before them were her mother and father in the form of skeletons. She took a step closer. Mom, Dad? And there on the mantel, above the fireplace, was a cold, ivory-colored skull. It looked down at her with its non-eyes, into her soul, into her mind, into all of her life, and said, Celia, Celia. Now, boring Celia might have screamed. Boring Celia might have given in. But this was a new Celia. This was the Celia who'd been brave enough to climb the stairs. This had been Celia who'd been brave enough to step into the darkness. This had been the Celia who was brave enough to go inside a door, to work and explore and wonder. This was a Celia who was not going to allow for this. And she yelled with every bit of oxygen and life in her lungs, I want my parents back, and ran to the windows and threw open the thick curtains, and in flooded light, morning light, was already the next day, and as the light filled the room, she saw the skeletons of her parents, boom, become fully themselves again. She saw the dust float away. She saw the game of Monopoly come back to its true form, and she saw the skull become the empty rock that it was. And she turned to her parents, who were yawning. We must have fallen asleep in front of the fire, Celia. How about some breakfast? And she said, I think that's a great idea. I know a pancake place back in the city. Let's go. The end.